we all doing? I know I'm very grateful to be up here with everybody on the panel and with all of you, and just so much incredible work and intelligence and passion and experience that's in the room. So I'm Ben Manski. I'm assistant professor of public sociology at George Mason University. I also serve as director of the Next System Studies program at GMU. And there are going to be points at which I'm going to go through slides that have a lot of text on them very quickly, and I'm just going to touch on them, so don't be bothered by that. And there are other things I'll dwell on further, but there are many opportunities for engagement, and I should just say we're having a reception this evening and want to invite people to that and talk about that as well. I want to recognize my colleague, April Donor over there, who is filming. She's director of our programs for the Center for Next System Studies as well. So I'll dive right into this. So Next System Studies, what is Next System Studies about? Next System Studies can be thought of as addressing the role that academia plays in assisting society towards understanding and acting upon the world systemic crises of our time, learning from those responding to these crises, assessing alternative designs for a next system, and evaluating different strategies for system change. So that's the short version of it. But this is not sort of a project that just was cooked up theoretically. It's been a project that's been operational at George Mason University since 2021. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our existing program at George Mason University to give you a sense of this. So first of all, we teach, right? And we have at the center of our teaching and our projects are our Next System Fellows. This is a cohort learning program. Every spring we have cohorts of undergraduate and graduate students who work together, who take classes together around a core seminar, and we are now, I think, on our 6th cohort, so you see 4 of our cohorts here, and this has been great. So we have this Next System Fellows program. They take courses, they do internship practicums, working with partner social movement organizations, community organizations. They work with us. Some of our early fellows are now on staff with Next System Studies. Others have gone on to graduate programs, law schools, are practicing law now. So it's been great. It's been really a wonderful experience. Secondly, we have a number of community and movement engaged research and action programs. One of those is Democratizing NOVA. NOVA is Northern Virginia. This is our oldest program. It has involved a lot of mapping and weaving activity across Northern Virginia, identifying over 160 initiatives that meet our selection criteria for essentially different types of next system democratization initiatives across 16 different categories. Out of that, it's come a lot of relationship building. We have built a governing council for Democratizing NOVA that has leadership from labor, from county agencies, from community organizations, from worker cooperatives, from independent business associations. They meet quarterly and are building new programs. And a lot of great things have come out of this. So for example, there is now a Northern Virginia Solidarity Economy Network that is quite active. It's a grassroots network. They do all kinds of things. They are able to operate in ways that we can't in academia, right? So we partner with them, they partner with us, and we are just about to launch a community and worker ownership center under contract with the County of Fairfax to build worker ownership and community ownership, particularly starting the child care sector. So all kinds of things happening there. We have the Next Constitutions Research Lab. A number of people in this room are PhD students at GMU who are involved in some of these projects. But we work with people internationally, scholars and activists who are working to engage in constitutional change as a means for system change at all kinds of levels. So we have a lot of sort of legible empirical research, comparative studies of constitutional revolutions, a massive project there. We have collaborations, and that's all ongoing. And then we have the Digital Commonwealth Project, which is working with technologists, and digital commoners, and tech worker co-ops to study the digital commoning movement. Basically, that's a way of saying the construction of digital technology by the people themselves, for the people themselves, right? And that's a research project. Dhruv Deepak, who will be at the reception tonight defending his 1,000-page dissertation in a month, has been doing incredible research with this, and that also has direct applications in terms of changing the world in the here and now. So these are both research and action. We follow Alain Touraine, the great French sociologist who passed away recently, and his sociological intervention model. We study the world as we change it. So it goes a little bit further than most forms of engaged research. But it's not just George Mason University, we're also working to build Next System Studies internationally and translocally. So GMU operates as a center for this field, and some of my colleagues up here have actually been involved in some of the work in conceptualizing next system studies elsewhere. But just to back up, where does this come from, this framework of next system? Nobody's actually clear where the next system framed, like who the author was, right? But I would just say that we have had a series of different efforts to build forms of scholarship over, I could go back to 1850 if we wanted to, but I'll just look at over the Gen X years, right? And since, that have taken on next system questions, right? So global studies, queer studies, anarchist studies, social ecology in the 1990s, transition studies, eco-stoic studies, Real Utopias Project, carceral studies, abolition studies, all kinds of work that represent ways of engaging scholars in academia and in communities around the question of system change in different areas, right? But also in terms of next system studies, we very clearly, if you were writing an intellectual history of next system studies, we come out of the movement side more than the academic side. We come out of academics who are involved in the movement side of work. But look in the United States at the kinds of movements that we have seen arise, and many of us have been involved in building these, right? We have been in a time of anti-systemic movements that have become systemic movements in the United States, movements that are working for system change. And so next system studies very much comes out of those movements, even more than outside of the academy itself. So let's talk about the trajectory here. I briefly gave you just a sense of what's going on with next system studies at George Mason University. We recently formalized our relationship with our partners internationally, so there is now a Center for Next System Studies that is housed at GMU but has board members elsewhere around the world. And it has many projects. We have the Next System Teach-Ins. I'll say a little bit more about that. We're working towards the formation of the Next System Studies Association, with the Community Power Project, the Digital Commonwealth Project. We've had many of the things you would expect to see if you were building a new field of study and action, right? We've had in-person meetings at Harper's Ferry and Hudson River and at GMU. We've had online global convergences, right, with hundreds of people. We had 2 of them last year from around the world. We had a first wave of teach-ins, 11 sites for Next System teach-ins in November across the Americas, from Buenos Aires to Toronto, right, that took place. We have upcoming this summer online forums on the Digital Commonwealth, on community power, and on next constitutions. And these are all organized by coalitions of different social movement organizations and academic centers. And then we are building, importantly, to a next wave of Next System teach-ins in April of not this year, but the following year, 2027. Okay, so the teach-ins can be thought of as our movement building, our field building, and our next system building engine, right? Sometimes the World Social Forum process has been called that. The teach-ins function in the same kind of way. Just imagine over 100 sites, if we're successful in April, across the world, primarily across the Americas. We're very focused on a Pan-American strategy, right? In which people are coming together in communities and in college campuses together to teach in, to bring everybody in the community together to take on the central question of next system studies, which I'm about to come to, right? Which is what kind of system is it that we want and how do we get there? Right? Okay, so let's talk about the theory of the field. How am I doing? 5 minutes?
You're at 6.
6, okay, good.
You're at 7 almost.
Okay, good. So I told you I'd be moving quickly. So let's talk about the theory of the field. So I mean, I've been a professor for 5 years, but I was an attorney, I was an executive director, I was a direct action campaigner, anything you talk about in the movement, I've been at it for over 40 plus years, right? And so I come at the field building question like an organizer does rather than an academic. But if I'm teaching classes and developing a curriculum and working with other academics, I have to develop pedagogies question. You have to take on epistemology, you have to take on all these kinds of questions. So we've done that. So let's first of all talk about what makes next system studies both possible and necessary. And here I'm borrowing from one of my many mentors, Garl Perovitz. Some of you may know of him, America Beyond Capitalism. Goes way back. I could give you a 2-hour lecture on Gar's history, read his stuff. But I'm also expanding and critiquing this. So I just want to give authorship to Gar, but also recognize that I'm quarreling with him. So first of all, I would just say that there are these 3 theses for next system studies. And the first of these begins by defining systemic crises as chronic dysfunctions of a system that threaten to bring about the system's collapse. Okay, so unless addressed, the system will collapse. That's how I define a systemic crisis. So this is an objective criteria, right? Such crises necessitate new systems, meaning that one way or another, a new system with a new set of logics will emerge. So when I say necessitate, that's not a should statement, that's saying it will happen, right? The contemporary political economic crisis of the world system has taken the form, and this is Gar here, of long periods of stagnation, punctuated until recently by short and relatively shallow periods of decline. So basically, his thesis in this case is that since the year in which I was born, 1974, we have been in this long building crisis that has had these punctuated moments, 2008 or 1997, depending where in the world you are, of collapse, but not total collapse. Okay? So that's first. Second thesis is this drawn out period of stagnation and decline opened up time and space for all kinds of experimentation with all kinds of institutional elements of a possible next system already emerging around the world. So basically, people and movements and communities around the world, all over the US, all over India, all over South Africa, Japan, you name it, been struggling with this world system crisis, but they've had enough time. We've had enough time to figure some things out, and that's good. Okay, that was the happy news of maybe 10 years ago when Dara and I started talking about this next system studies thing. However, our time for experimentation is at its limit. Anthropogenic climate change and digitalization are proven accelerants that are hastening the world system. Basically, there's a lot more energy in the world system, in the biosphere. It's been added. When you add heat to a system, you get more chaos, right? And so unfortunately, what that means is that we have less time for experimentation. We do not have time for Gar's more optimistic horizon, saying you've got to be in this for the next 20 to 30 years and looking at 2040 and 2050, right? So that has changed the nature of the project of building next system studies for me and for all of us who have been engaged in this work. So this is where we get to the crisis question. That's where I'm going to end. The other thing about next system studies in terms of the theory of this field, right, is that I've developed what I call the 4 domains of next system studies and the questions that arise between them. So in terms of our classroom and the way in which we design our research projects, we take on questions that have to do with the nature of system crises. We take on questions that have to do with what systemic movements know and could know, right? We take on the questions of system design. We take on questions of system change. So questions of system change basically are what are the pathways through which we know that our systems, our social systems change, right? Historically, that's been the study of revolutions, of social transformation or reconstruction, right? So you can imagine designing, a paper or a research project, and my students do this, right? In which they're looking at the intersection of systemic movements and system crises. What is it about a system crisis that produces a systemic movement, right? What is it the systemic movements know about system crises? What is it about the design of the current system that actually leads it to have the tendency towards crisis? What is it about the current crisis or series of crises that suggest alternative designs for a next system? What is it about the pathways that are available for system change that may open up possibilities for certain kinds of movements and not others, and so on? So you see how this kind of framework is proven useful. Okay. Let's talk about engaging the crisis. So I had this thesis earlier in which I said that we have climate change and digitalization that have been hastening and accelerating a crisis. And what that meant at the time when I put that slide together a year ago was that, hey, we're in the decisive decade of the 2020s and we don't have until the 2040s, and we actually have to figure this out now, right? But actually the crisis has accelerated further than that, something I didn't read, it's accelerated further than that because we're dealing with a crisis in this country this year, which is determinative and it's existential, so I'll come to that. So let's talk broadly and theoretically. So if we're in a time in which we have to figure this out and move on it much faster than we should need to, right? What does that mean in terms of how we think about the relationship between these different domains? So one of those is that we need to move from looking at systemic movements and system design as systemic movements simply producing system design. We actually need to be designing the next system here and now, moving beyond prefigurative politics into a form of strategic prefigurative politics, in which we're building new systems that actually produce the movements that can then accelerate the construction of new systems, right? So that's what this slide's about. The second thing is, we actually have to survive this year. So, if we don't survive this year, next system studies is not possible. Okay? And if next system studies has a historic mission, right, or like if the mission is important, then we actually have to survive the year because we actually have some big problems that even if we didn't have fascism in this country, right? So that's some of the things that we've been grappling with. And we're in a period right now where the long building crisis has turned into a ruptural crisis. For those of you who know Eric Olin Wright's work, we are in a period of rupture. This is a year of rupture. The Republic is not functioning. It will probably not, in my opinion, survive the year, right? And so this means that we actually have to
engage in some of the work that we're doing in ways that intervenes much more actively. Okay? And I don't have time to go into detail about this, but I'll leave this up here as the teaser. There's a lot to be said. Is that what we are doing beyond sort of building the field and long-term work is that we have invested in 4 kinds of strategies. You've heard them named briefly already. We're building next system studies as rapidly as we can in academia, because academia can lean in and engage in the process of social reconstruction much more than it has. That's important. We're linking all the community defense and community-based and municipalist strategies as fast as we can, so that, as we've already seen in this last picture, you should know who that guy is, by the way, right? There's a reason why Chicago was the city that stood up first. Our cities are resilient, more resilient than other bases of opposition, right? That's Brandon Johnson. So we need to recognize that. How can we do that? And then finally, in terms of these last 2 sets of strategies, digital technology and the practice of constitutionalism. These are the ways that in which people, movements from below, can come together and link up, right? And actually engage in the design of the next system. So we are working actively around that. So thank you.
Thank you.